Hey everyone, welcome to Professor Long's Lectures in Anatomy and Physiology. I'm Professor Bob Long. If you're watching these videos, you're either enrolled in my class, so learn the structures off the list of things to know and the structures that I cover. If you're not in my class, I hope you find this helpful to understand the stuff that you're covering in your classes, but you may cover additional structures or fewer structures or whatnot. Learn what you need to know for your classes. If my videos are helpful, please hit like and subscribe, or at least like, so that I know I should keep doing them. Now we're going to be following on page 20 and 21 of our list of things to know, so you guys can follow along and find the terms as I talk about them. Okay? We have two models here which are essentially the same thing. One is the respiratory tree. The other one is the respiratory tree buried inside the lungs. So I'm going to start with this model just to get oriented so that you guys can see that this is buried inside all of this tissue and under these organs. By the way, this is called the respiratory tree because if we turn it upside down, it looks like a tree branching. We would have the trunk, the major branches, all the minor branches going all the way down to the leaflets. Oddly enough, trees breathe through their leaves. And we breathe through these little pieces of tissue called alveoli that we take air in here, we take oxygen through the alveoli into our bloodstream. Our cells use oxygen and glucose to make energy. Our cells will have some waste tissue, or a waste compound called carbon dioxide left over, and we exhale that back out. What we exhale, trees inhale through their leaves. They use the carbon dioxide and water and the energy of sunlight to synthesize or make glucose because they can't chase down food and eat it. We call that photosynthesis, using photons of light to synthesize a compound. And so what we exhale, trees inhale. Now, when they make glucose through photosynthesis from carbon dioxide and water, one of their byproducts is oxygen, and trees exhale oxygen through their leaves. So we take in oxygen and let out carbon dioxide. Trees take in carbon dioxide and let out the oxygen. So it turns out that, while people are alarmed about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and I don't want to get into the political discussions about that, and you can call me a denier or whatever. People call me names for trying to be a scientist and think about the facts, okay? But there is evidence that as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere goes up, at least to some threshold, plant life flourishes. There's more food, more growth, more species and things can survive and live off the trees and the plants. Anyway, you can see why it looks like a respiratory tree. Now, I'm going to turn this back over and I'm going to show you a few structures. From the previous model, you saw that this is the hyoid, called the Thyrohyoid Ligament. Again, not on your list. We do have the tracheal cartilage right here. This structure right here is called the Thyroid Cartilage, I should say. This is the Thyroid Cartilage. And if I open it up, we would have the larynx inside there. We have the cricoid cartilage, and we have this tube called the trachea, and each individual blue structure here would be called a tracheal cartilage or C-ring. Now I'm going to push this aside a second, and I'm going to focus on this model because you can see the same structures. This would be the hyoid bone. You can see the thyroid cartilage of the larynx here. You can see the cricoid cartilage. It's all buried with the thyroid gland and some muscle tissue. But when we strip that away, you can see that. And I can see some of the individual tracheal cartilages here of the trachea, buried behind the aorta and the carotids, the superior vena cava, and the brachiocephalic veins, to give you some orientation. Now, these are the two lungs. We have the right lung and the left lung. Remember, it's the subject's right and left, not yours. This would be the right lung, this would be the left lung. And by the way, this large muscular structure here would be called the diaphragm, this big dome-shaped muscle. This is the diaphragm down here. Now, you can see the heart buried between the two lungs. The left lung has a unique feature that's sort of a cutout where the heart goes, called the cardiac notch. So if I remove this piece right here, I can see the cardiac notch as this little piece right here. If I look carefully at the left lung, I notice it only has two lobes with a little line separating them. If I look carefully at the right lung, I can see that the right lung has 1, 2, 3 lobes. There's a little lobe over here. It actually is larger on the posterior margin, separated by 2 lines. So the right lung has 3 lobes. The left lung has 2 lobes. The line running here is called the horizontal fissure because it runs horizontally across. This line here that runs at an angle is called the oblique fissure. That divides the right lung into a superior lobe, a middle lobe, not medial, medial means closer to the midline, but a middle lobe and an inferior lobe. If I look at the left lung, I only have an oblique fissure here. There is no transverse or horizontal fissure. I have the oblique fissure, I have the superior lobe and the inferior lobe, and that's it. Now, if I start to remove the pieces of the lung here, and if I remove the heart, you can see a few structures. One, you can see a continuation of the trachea here down until where it splits. As soon as the trachea splits, the very first two branches, there's one for each lung, they're called primary bronchi. Bronchus is singular, bronchi would be plural. So this would be called the left primary bronchus. This area here would be called the right primary bronchus. This tube, by the way, that's running down here and sticks out underneath the diaphragm is the esophagus. The esophagus is running deep to or posterior to the trachea. And then the esophagus continues here and sticks out here. One other thing I want to show you on this model while we're at it, this tube is called the esophagus. If I could pull the tube out of the diaphragm here, there would be a hole in this tube, and this opening is called the esophageal hiatus. It's where people get hiatal hernias. That opening would be the esophageal hiatus. So the tube is the esophagus, the opening is called the hiatus or esophageal hiatus. Now, once the primary bronchi split, on the right lung, we have these three branches that are called the secondary bronchi. We have one secondary bronchus for each lobe of a lung. So I have 1, 2, 3 secondary bronchi on the right. I only have 2 secondary bronchi on the left. So trachea, right and left primary bronchus until they split. The primary bronchus ends and turns into 2 secondary bronchi here. The primary bronchus on this side ends and becomes 2 secondary bronchi there. There's tertiary bronchi and quaternary bronchi and all these other branching levels, but don't worry about that for now. You can see the pulmonary artery in blue here, the pulmonary vein in red, and how the blood goes into the lungs. We do the oxygen and gas exchange. So that covers most of this model that I want. Oh, one other thing I forgot to show you. You see this sort of dark area or this light blue outline with this dark area? There's an opening in the lung that the bronchi and the blood vessels have to penetrate through. That opening, this opening here, or this little dark area here, that opening is called a hilus, or each one would be called a hilum. So if I ask you for the opening where the tubes enter, it's called a hilus or hilum. Okay. Now, I'm going to go over to this model because this model shows us a little bit some other structures. I can see the thyroid cartilage here. I can see the cricoid cartilage here. The trachea until it splits with individual tracheal cartilages or C-rings. Once it splits, these branches would be your 2 primary bronchi. The right primary bronchus, the left primary bronchus. Now as I come down here, it's going to split again. The next level of branching is called a secondary bronchus. So that would be this little area in light blue here, and this area in light blue here would be called a secondary bronchus. On this side, this, and this would all be secondary bronchi. I tend to like to ask them over here. It's a little easier to follow. So, left primary bronchus, right primary bronchus. Secondary bronchus, secondary bronchus, secondary bronchus, secondary bronchus. There's a third one on this side, but who cares? Now, I interpret this model a little differently than others. As long as it remains this same light blue color, they are bronchi. Once they change colors to these other brightly colored things, the reds and pinks and yellows and greens and the other blues, they're called bronchioles. A bronchiole is a small bronchus. So if I follow this secondary bronchus out, it ends right here and it splits. You see these 2 little light blue regions? I refer to those as the tertiary bronchi. It looks like the word tertiary, but it's pronounced tertiary. It means third level. These are the tertiary bronchi. These are the bronchioles. Got it? And there's several levels of bronchioles. If someone has bronchitis, then you have inflammation of the bronchi. They're inflamed and irritated due to a bacterium or some kind of inhalation of something. If you have laryngitis, you have inflammation inside the larynx. If you have bronchiolitis, that means the bronchioles are starting to get inflamed, and you could develop some issues there like pneumonia and other things as we hypersecrete some fluids. But anyway, those are the branching levels. Trachea, primary bronchi, secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, bronchioles. Got it? Now, I'm going to remove the thyroid cartilage and open up the larynx. When I open this up, oops, this person was choking on something. I can see these two little lines here, the one up on top and this sharper one here that has a little bit of a white color. The top ridge or line there is called the vestibular fold or false vocal fold. It's also called the vestibular cord, or the it's the vestibular fold or vestibular cord or vestibular ligament. This white one here is called the vocal fold, the vocal cord, or the vocal ligament. However it's written on your list is how you should learn it. But you'll hear it all three ways in the literature. But that's your vocal cords, or vocal fold, or vocal ligament. The vestibular fold or ligament isn't really involved in sound production, but the vocal cords, or vocal ligament, or vocal fold is. And that's why these are called the true vocal cords and the false vocal cords in the common vernacular. We're going to use vestibular ligament and vocal ligament, okay? Now, this light blue flap right here would be the epiglottis. It's actually filled with some elastic cartilage, and when a muscle contracts, it closes over this opening up here called the glottis, so food and drink goes down the esophagus, and then it springs open. So if I put this model back together, and I look at it from a different angle, I can see a few things, okay? If I twist it this way and look down, this opening here that I have the stick in is called the glottis. This flap above the glottis is the epiglottis. Now, if I look at the back of the model, on the back side of all of these, of the thyroid cartilage here, there's an opening. And there's a little cartilage here that is called the arytenoid, or some people pronounce it arytenoid cartilage. The arytenoid or arytenoid cartilage. Those cartilages can swivel with some muscle tissue pulling on them, and when they open up, it pulls the vocal cords tight, and when they close, the vocal cords become open, and doing this helps change the inflection of our voice by changing the vibrational frequency of the sound. Now I'm going to move for a second so my lights don't shut off. So, all of these little muscles and the cartilage here helps us change the inflection of our voice by moving the vocal ligaments, so the vocal cords. So, quick review on this model, and then we'll be done. Thyroid cartilage is the front here. The whole structure would be called the larynx. This is the cricoid cartilage, the trachea with the individual tracheal cartilages. Once the trachea branches, the first two branches are called primary bronchi, right and left. Then the next level of branching would be called secondary bronchi. And then this last little light blue branch would be called a tertiary bronchus, or bronchi. All of these brightly colored ones are called bronchioles. Again, if I flip it around, on the back side here, I can see the opening called the glottis. I can see the flap above it called the epiglottis, and I can see the arytenoid cartilage. There's another one at the very tip called the corniculate cartilage. You don't even know it. But that's the arytenoid cartilage. Now, if I open the model up, let me turn it around here and open it. The things that you can see on the inside would be, this would be the cartilage, or this is the epiglottis. This is the vestibular fold and the vocal fold, or vestibular cord and vocal cord. You can see the musculature and some other structures here, but we're not going to learn all of that for this class. Look, I hope you learned something. I hope you had as much fun as I did going over this, and I hope to see you in the next video. Start practicing this and studying it and working it and saying it and touching it and drawing it and labeling your pictures until you can't stand it. Then do it 5 more times. Do it till you understand it. Do it till you can make an A on the test. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.